Hey guys, welcome back. It's me, Cyrus. And today I want to talk to you about a website that I go to quite a bit. This is not a sponsored thing or anything like that. It's just a website that I like. It's called archive.org. I'm sure you're familiar with it from the Wayback Machine, the number one source for settling internet arguments. The Wayback Machine is an archive on archive.org, and it keeps all kinds of great information about the past. It also is a good place to go to find things that you might be looking for, that you might enjoy, that might be related to retro gaming. One of those things is their extensive collection of video game magazines that have been scanned in. And I am a huge fan of video game magazines. I absolutely love magazines, especially about video games, real tangible physical magazines. And Electronic Gaming Monthly is a magazine that was probably my number one magazine whenever I was growing up. I subscribed back then to Electronic Gaming Monthly, Video Games and Computer Entertainment, and Game Pro. And then I would also pick up some other ones that came along, like Edge Magazine and some of the other ones that showed up later on. But EGM was my number one. EGM was my trusted source for information. This is where I would go to when I wanted to know specifics about things and obsess over things and cut out little screenshot pictures for my weird spiral notebook that I kept for game consoles that I was obsessed with. I was a weird kid who loved video games. And this is where I found some of the best stuff. This is a issue 17 from 1990 and has some interesting things that I wanted to share with you. If you want to look at these magazines, go to archive.org. You can check them out for yourself. Skull and Crossbones. Of course, that's Tengen or Tengen, however you say that. We actually know it's Atari, but they were releasing games back then for the Nintendo. There's lots of good things here. The Game Boy, the Nintendo Game Boy. This was on fire back then. The Game Boy was doing very well. It was doing gangbusters, as they say. Super awesome little handheld. Yes, it was black and white, but the batteries lasted a long time, and there was really good games. Really good games on the Game Boy. And I still love the Game Boy. Its dot matrix screen has always been fascinating to me, those types of screens. Seeing games actually run on that type of screen, something that you usually only saw for like calculators or like those cheap little Tiger handhelds and things like that. But on the Game Boy, it was like a real console. It was like a real console experience almost, just in black and white on the Game Boy. So there was definitely some cool stuff there. Yeah, Electronic Arts was pushing hard with their new sports titles on the Sega Genesis. And John Madden Football, wow. Here it is at the very beginning of that franchise. And this would obviously go on to become the predominant sports game. You know, this was revolutionary at the time. Madden Football was fantastic. Yeah, there's so many interesting games. They're showing different ads for different games here. Godzilla, pretty cool. Here's some cool games. The Golgo 13 games, you ever play those? Golgo 13 or the Moffat Conspiracy? So many good games. There's another really cool Game Boy game. Good stuff. Just love going through these old magazines, looking at stuff, discovering things you never really noticed before. Things catch your eye, captivate your attention. Just remembering what it was like back at that time. Big old huge Sega heart. Look at that arcade game. That R360 they got there. It's pretty awesome. I don't know if you've ever seen something like that. I remember seeing something like that was playing G-Lock back in the day. It's pretty cool. It's almost like a carnival ride, but you're playing a video game. They do these reviews where they had like different people on their staff offer their own interpretation, their own short little reviews for each of these games. Steve, Ed, Martin, and Sushi X. And a lot of times I would use this to help me decide what games I was actually going to try to buy and what games I didn't really want to care about. Sometimes it burned me though, because I didn't always agree with their reviews. Sometimes their reviews were not good. I don't know. They just made some some weird opinions sometimes. But overall, EGM was pretty trustworthy overall. So I would usually trust what they had to say more than other places. It seemed like GamePro was a little too easy on the games. GamePro reviewed games kind of like I would review games. A little too easy on the games. So EGM was a little bit more, little harder on the games. Here's an example, Werewolf. It was pretty solid reviews. I thought it was a pretty good game. Dizzy, that's an interesting game. From Galoob, that's something we'll be talking about in a minute. Joe Montana Football for the Master System. Yeah. So this is why Madden was such a big deal, because it was not that great. It was really not that great. Mickey Mouse, wow, look at the scores on that one. 9s. Dynamite Duke. Final Zone. Yeah, Final Zone's on the TurboGrafx too. Final Zone 2 anyway. It's a lot better. There's John Madden Football. Look at that. Straight 9s for its first outing. Yep. That's pretty much what I would give that to. Guerrilla Fighter. Yeah, that's a good solid game and good on Game Boy. Rygar. Come on, give that a little bit better. Well, it's got 3 7s. That's pretty good. Rygar for the Lynx. That was pretty cool back then. Big Genesis ads with Strider. They got the pages kind of backwards here, but it's all right. Gaming gossip from Quarterman. Sometimes good information, sometimes kind of, some BS. There's the first picture I ever saw of a Sega CD. It was the mock-up. It's not a real prototype. I think it's just like a mock-up artist rendition of what they thought the Sega CD might look like. We were all wondering what that Sega CD was going to be. It was going to be the peak of technology. Some just awesome stuff. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. And here we go. The subject of this video. So I love the Game Boy, as I was talking about earlier. And here's an interesting mock-up of a cartridge that was in prototype that was going to be released by a company called Camerica. This is a company that made the Game Genie and famously got into a huge lawsuit with Nintendo and actually won that lawsuit in 1991 to release the Game Genie. Unfortunately, because of all the litigation and the changing marketplace and who knows what else, they ended up declaring bankruptcy in 1993. But back in the day, this was a company that was just doing things differently and challenging Nintendo's iron-fisted reign of what Nintendo would allow in the marketplace for its console. Back in 1990, when this magazine came out, Electronic Gaming Monthly number 17, they were prototyping some devices like this one right here. They had another device called the Express, which is a portable NES, and it actually never made it to the light of day, and neither did this. Although this device was not official, there was an official way that developers could play Game Boy games on an NES, and those were called Wide Boys. This is basically what you're looking at when you talk about a Wide Boy. It's not exactly a commercial grade product, something for the masses, something that's packaged and that people can buy out on their own, a consumer grade product. This is more for the industry itself, for developing things. And so there was a way that this could be achieved, that Game Boy games could be displayed on a TV screen for developers to help them with that process. But this was not the way to do that. This was not the official means of doing that. This device was a prototype that was designed, that the idea behind this device was people would be able to play their Game Boy games on their NES, right? That's what it's for. That's what this mock-up is. And they were going to release this without Nintendo's approval. They were going to do this on their own. They had an interesting description of how this was going to be achieved, which, like I said, you can read here about how the code was actually going to be converted from Z80 into 6502. I don't really understand how that was possible. I've seen some technical people talking about this sort of thing, and it seems like there's a lot of people that are unsure that this thing could even do what it says it could do. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's some misunderstanding or mistranslation somewhere along the way here. But anyway, this device was basically going to be the Nintendo Switch before there was a Nintendo Switch. You would be able to play your Game Boy games on your NES, and that would have been pretty revolutionary back in that time. You know, Nintendo didn't normally, back at that time period, embrace the idea of cross-compatibility or backwards compatibility. They didn't have a device to play the Game Boy on the NES. They didn't offer backwards compatibility when they released the Super Nintendo. It didn't have the ability to play NES games on the Super Nintendo. When the Nintendo 64 came out, it didn't even support the Super Nintendo or the NES. They didn't get around to thinking about backwards compatibility until a little bit later. But when they first started to consider backwards compatibility, it actually was with the Game Boy. But it wasn't on the NES. Well, with great power comes great possibility. This is the Super Famicom, Nintendo's 16-bit sequel to the Famicom and the NES. And this is the Super Game Boy. This is a cartridge that plugs into the Super Famicom that you plug Game Boy cartridges into that lets you play your Game Boy cartridges on your TV with the Super Famicom controller. What else could you wish for? Well, more than that, games can be enhanced, like Donkey Kong here, for example, has some special graphics and things that you only get with the Super Game Boy. And it will actually add some artificial color and things like that to regular Game Boy games as well. This is the Super Game Boy 2. This is a revised model of the Super Game Boy released in Japan to fix a couple of little things. It's a lot more expensive if you want to buy this nowadays, but it gives you a better experience. And this is the Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo. This is the one that most people are familiar with that know about this thing or have seen this thing in North America. The Super Game Boy was a really cool addition to this system and a really great way to play games. And it was really awesome that Nintendo had finally come around and realized that there was a market for something like this. Well, this is the Super Game Boy, and this is Donkey Kong for the Game Boy. This is a Super Game Boy enhanced game, and this is what you get when you play an enhanced game this way. You get a really nice color palette, you get a really cool custom bezel for each game, and some extra features sometimes as well. The Super Game Boy will let you go into a menu and adjust all kinds of stuff. You can adjust the color palette to different palettes if you'd like to try something different other than the one that's preloaded. You'll want to try and play around with that for the regular Game Boy games. These Super Game Boy Enhanced games have a palette that's actually better, so you kind of want to stick with that probably. You can change the bezels to other things. If there's something you want to try that you might enjoy better, you think you might, you can give that a shot. You can make adjustments. You can paint on the screen. There's all kinds of stuff you can do here. It's pretty wild. And of course, you can play the games. So we will play a little bit of Donkey Kong just for a second, just so you can see what you're dealing with here with the sound and the graphics and everything. So I will shut up and we will play the game. So it is a shame that we never actually got the Beiderman version of a wide boy for the original NES. I think it would have been really awesome to be able to play my NES carts on my NES back then. There are devices that are available on the internet that will allow you to play Game Boy games on a TV. Obviously, there's the one that we talked about, the Super Nintendo Super Game Boy. There's the Game Boy player for the GameCube. There's third-party devices that are out there from different companies that have the ability to let you play your Game Boy game on a big TV. Some of those are emulation-based. Some of those are FPGA-based. So there are ways that this can be done now. Or you could just play the thing through an emulator on your PC and do it that way. But this was a really interesting idea. I don't know how realistic it was or if it actually could have happened or would happen, but it's really fascinating to me to see something like this and to know that we can enjoy those Game Boy games on devices in other ways and actually play them on real Nintendo hardware using things like the Super Game Boy or the Game Boy player for the GameCube, things like that. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I love game magazines. It's always cool to go back and find these interesting stories and talk about these things that just never came out and never came to fruition and try to find out exactly what went on with them. So, Paul Beiderman, wherever you are, thank you for your hard work on that. Hopefully there is a working prototype out there somewhere. Someday someone will discover and actually be able to test and maybe somebody will buy that. I don't know. We'll have to find out probably one of these days. And, you know, pour one out for David J. Harding and Comerica. They put a lot of work into that company. They release games like Micro Machines, the Game Genie, the Quattro 4-in-1 cartridges, things like that. They just weren't playing by the rules. All right, anyway, that's it. Thanks, guys, for watching. More videos coming soon. Take care. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.